Hollywood built legends out of beauty, charisma, and luck. But for some stars, what they had in charm, they lacked in basic sense. These weren't small stumbles. These were epic misjudgments, wild decisions, and missed opportunities so jaw-dropping, they make you wonder, how did anyone let them near a camera? Today, we uncover the golden age actors who were too dumb to believe, and somehow still became stars. 1. Johnny Weissmuller. Johnny Weissmuller wasn't just Tarzan, he was the Tarzan. His primal yell echoed through theaters for nearly 2 decades. But long before the vines and loincloths, Johnny was a world-class athlete. He won 5 Olympic gold medals in swimming and shattered dozens of records. MGM saw a golden opportunity and cast him as Tarzan in 1932. His ripped physique and wordless charm made him an instant icon. But behind that muscle was a painful truth. Johnny Weissmuller was nearly illiterate. He had only completed elementary school and could barely read a script. The studios kept his lines short and simple, grunts, yells, and the occasional "me Tarzan." He never got to be anything else. For 16 years, he played the same role over and over again, locked into a character that never grew. He wasn't respected as an actor, just a body in a jungle costume. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Johnny didn't understand money either. He earned millions, but trusted a business manager who swindled him with fake investments. By the 1960s, he was nearly broke. Then tragedy struck. In 1962, his daughter Heidi died in a horrific car crash. She was pregnant, and Johnny never emotionally recovered. Once, while traveling in Cuba during political unrest, rebels stopped his car and pointed guns at him. With nothing else to offer, he let out the iconic Tarzan yell. The rebels paused, recognized him, and let him go. A sound from his jungle days saved his life, but it was also a painful reminder. Johnny Weissmuller never left the jungle. Not really. 2. George Raft. George Raft had it all. Looks, charm, fame, and gangster swagger that made him Hollywood's go-to tough guy. He played iconic roles in hits like Scarface and had a personal style that set trends across America. But what he didn't have was good judgment. In 1941, Raft was offered the lead in High Sierra. He turned it down because, get this, he didn't like that the character dies at the end. That role went to Humphrey Bogart, and it launched Bogart into the A-list. That one no became a turning point in Hollywood history, but Raft didn't stop there. When the Maltese Falcon came around, he said no again. He didn't want to work with first-time director John Huston and thought remaking a 1930s flop was beneath him. Bogart took the role. It became a classic. And when Casablanca was being cast, Raft wasn't even considered. The studio saw Bogart as a proven hitmaker, thanks again to the roles Raft had refused. The irony? Raft once saved Bogart's life on set by pulling him away from a runaway truck. He literally saved the man who'd go on to take every opportunity Raft threw away. But Raft's poor choices didn't stop at roles. He was tight with real-life mobsters like Bugsy Siegel and Oni Madden. That made him perfect for gangster roles, and a liability for producers. He began rejecting parts that made him look like a criminal, even though everyone already saw him as one. In trying to protect his image, Raft erased his own career. He wasn't destroyed by scandal. He wasn't untalented. He just couldn't see that he was his own worst enemy. 3. Ed Wood. Ed Wood didn't make bad movies by accident. He made them with passion. That's what makes his story so unbelievable. He truly thought he was a master filmmaker, while producing some of the worst films Hollywood had ever seen. Take Plan 9 from Outer Space, his most infamous work. Shot in 1957, it was supposed to be a dramatic sci-fi thriller. Instead, it became a circus of cardboard sets, visible strings, recycled graveyard props, and acting so wooden it could splinter. It was so bad that audiences laughed out loud, not with the film, but at it. Still, Ed believed. He told friends he was creating timeless art. Even when critics shredded his work, he smiled proudly. He didn't just miss the mark, he couldn't see the target. And it didn't stop with sci-fi. In the 1960s and 70s, he dove into sexploitation and adult films with titles like Necromania. He saw them as bold, artistic expressions. Everyone else saw them as trash. His obsession with Angora sweaters and casting Bela Lugosi, long past his prime, only added to the bizarre legend. Ed died broke in 1978, dismissed as a washed-up drunk, but in a final twist of fate, he became famous posthumously, declared the worst director of all time in a cult biography. The title was meant as an insult. Instead, it gave Ed Wood what he always wanted: fame, just not the kind he understood. 4. Buster Crabbe. Buster Crabbe had one of the most heroic starts imaginable. An Olympic gold medalist in 1932, he shocked the world by winning the 400-meter freestyle in a nail-biting finish. Hollywood came calling almost immediately. He had the perfect face, perfect body, and the kind of confidence producers loved. By 1936, Crabbe became the face of 3 legendary serial characters: Tarzan, Flash Gordon, and Buck Rogers. No one else ever did that. He was a one-man franchise machine. But Buster made a choice that defined the rest of his career. He never wanted to evolve. Studios offered him serious parts, films that would have pushed his range and cemented him as more than just a matinee idol. He said no. The biggest opportunity came in 1952, when producers offered him a role in High Noon, one of the most respected westerns ever made. Crabbe turned it down in favor of another cheap, forgettable action flick. He later admitted that he had made only one A movie in his entire career. For someone who had fought to the top, literally in Olympic waters, it was a shocking surrender. Even outside of Hollywood, Crabbe made poor decisions. He tried his hand at business, opening a pool company after retiring from films. It flopped spectacularly due to overspending and poor planning. His story mirrored his old Olympic rival Johnny Weissmuller, both golden boys who couldn't manage a dollar or a career once the cameras stopped rolling. Buster Crabbe wasn't a fraud. He was genuine, likable, and hardworking, but his refusal to grow, on screen or off, left him behind while Hollywood moved forward. 5. Frank Fay. Frank Fay was once the highest-paid man in vaudeville, earning an eye-popping $17,500 a week in the 1920s. He's even considered the first true stand-up comedian. His style, casual, personal, smart, would later influence legends like Jack Benny. He could have gone down in history as a comedy pioneer, but Frank Fay was his own worst enemy. He was also a raging alcoholic, a violent husband, and an open bigot. His marriage to actress Barbara Stanwyck was a public disaster. He once threw their adopted son into a swimming pool during a drunken outburst. Hollywood whispered about it. Soon, it shouted. Insulting Jews backstage, beating his wife, and picking fights with fellow performers weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. One of the final straws came when he insulted a young Milton Berle. Berle waited until Frank's back was turned, then smashed him in the face with a stage brace, ripping his nose wide open. That moment became legend, and Fay still wasn't done. In 1946, barely a year after the Holocaust, he marched in pro-fascist rallies. People were horrified, roles dried up. Even his breakthrough part as Elwood in Harvey was stripped from him and given to James Stewart, who got an Oscar nomination. By the time Frank Fay died in 1961, he had been blacklisted by the industry he helped shape. He died alone and disgraced, forgotten by a town that once bowed to him. Frank wasn't dumb because he lacked talent. He was dumb because he thought talent excused everything else. 6. William Frolley. To millions, William Frolley will always be Fred Mertz, the crusty, lovable landlord on I Love Lucy. But few know just how close Frolley came to losing that iconic role, and how much of his career was torched by his own self-destructive behavior. Frolley had been in Hollywood for decades by the time Lucy aired in 1951, over 100 film credits under his belt, but nothing really memorable. He had a reputation for drinking, bad temper, and unpredictable outbursts. In 1928, he punched actor Clifton Webb during a Broadway production. That got him blackballed from New York theater. Hollywood wasn't far behind. When Desi Arnaz wanted him for I Love Lucy, CBS executives panicked. They were sure he'd show up drunk, cause fights, or forget his lines. Arnaz gave him one last shot, with strict rules: mess up 3 times, and you're out. To everyone's surprise, Frolley pulled it off. He showed up sober, knew his lines, even won over Desi. But behind the scenes, he was still the same angry, bitter man. He hated Vivian Vance, who played his wife. She hated him back. She once joked no one would believe she was married to that old coot. Frolley fired back with off-script insults and years of icy silence. Their hatred lasted until the grave. On My Three Sons, his health began to fail. He'd fall asleep during takes. A prop man had to tap his foot to keep him awake. He cursed the writers whenever he forgot a line. In 1966, he dropped dead on a Hollywood sidewalk after watching a movie, alone. No tributes, no applause. William Frolley was a man who almost destroyed himself and only barely managed to leave a legacy that people still love, even if they never knew just how close he came to losing it all. 7. Jayne Mansfield. Jayne Mansfield had it all: curves, charisma, and cameras that adored her. But behind the platinum hair and breathy voice was a woman, far more complex than anyone realized. Jayne wasn't just a Hollywood. She was a certified genius. She spoke 5 languages, played the violin, and claimed an IQ of 163. So how did someone so smart end up being remembered as just another dumb blonde? Simple. She played the role too convincingly and never escaped it. Jayne burst into Hollywood in the 1950s, landing lead roles in The Girl Can't Help It and Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter? Audiences ate up her over-the-top sexuality, and Jayne leaned in hard. At parties, she'd accidentally expose herself to photographers. She crashed events in skin-tight dresses designed to break headlines. But the most shocking move came in 1963's Promises, Promises, where she became the first mainstream actress of the sound era to appear fully nude on screen. She wasn't tricked into it. It was deliberate. 3 nude scenes totaling 59 seconds, replayed as dream sequences. Critics were appalled. Theaters were mobbed. Despite her brilliance, Jayne made a devastating calculation. Fame now was worth more than respect later. In a rare interview with Johnny Carson, he tried to pierce her persona. "Nobody with an IQ of 160 can be that stupid," he said. Jayne giggled and dodged the question. Even then, she refused to break character. And then came the tragedy. In 1967, Jayne was in a car with her children asleep in the back seat when it slammed into a truck. She was killed instantly at just 34. The accident was so brutal, it led to a new traffic safety standard, the Mansfield bar you see on trucks today. Jayne was never dumb. She just buried her brilliance beneath an image she couldn't shake. 8. Guy Madison. Guy Madison was discovered by accident. A sailor on leave during World War II, he attended a radio show taping and was spotted by a talent scout. He didn't audition. He didn't ask for it. He was just good looking. That was enough. Soon, David O. Selznick gave him a screen test, renamed him Guy Madison, and cast him in a movie. He said barely 2 lines. The audience swooned. Fan mail flooded in. A star was born. But there was one glaring issue. Guy Madison couldn't act. That alone wasn't unusual in 1940s Hollywood. What made Madison unique was that he didn't care. He refused to take acting classes, rejected coaching, dismissed feedback. "Audiences want me," he once said, "not some Shakespearean." For a while, his looks carried him. He became a TV cowboy in The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, a massive hit that ran for 7 years. His face appeared on cereal boxes, bubblegum wrappers, and kids' lunch boxes. He was America's cowboy, but fame fades fast when it isn't earned. After the show ended, Madison's lack of range became painfully obvious. He moved to Europe, doing spaghetti westerns and forgettable action flicks. His performances were wooden, emotionless, almost robotic. His personal life was just as messy. He divorced actress Gail Russell, who was battling alcoholism, and married someone else just days later, in Mexico. The press feasted on the scandal. Worst of all, despite making great money during his prime, Madison lost it all. He invested in a ranch without knowing how to manage it. It tanked. By the 1960s, he was broke, stuck doing bad movies, and forgotten by the studios. Guy Madison had every chance to grow. He just chose not to. 9. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis had the kind of looks that could melt cameras, and for a time, he had the talent to match. Born Bernard Schwartz in the Bronx, he clawed his way from poverty to the top of the Hollywood ladder. By the mid-1950s, Curtis wasn't just a matinee idol, he was a serious actor. In Sweet Smell of Success, he stunned critics with his role as a manipulative press agent. In The Defiant Ones, he earned an Oscar nomination alongside Sidney Poitier in a bold film about race and justice. Then came Some Like It Hot, a timeless comedy masterpiece where he held his own against Marilyn Monroe and Jack Lemmon. Curtis was on top of the world. And then, he wasn't. Instead of building on his critical success, Curtis made one bizarre career choice after another. He picked weak scripts, embraced style over substance, and slowly faded into mediocrity. By the late 1960s, he was doing television work in campy thrillers nobody remembered. It wasn't a scandal that ruined him. It wasn't a lack of talent. It was pure, baffling misjudgment. He had shown the world what he was capable of, and then walked away from it. Curtis made one last dramatic turn in The Boston Strangler, a chilling true crime role that showed he still had it. But it felt like too little, too late. He had everything: the face, the charm, the skill. But Tony Curtis never truly understood what made him great, and he didn't fight to keep it. 10. Clarence Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton wasn't just a Hollywood star. He was a cinematic genius. In the silent era, his stone-faced expression and daredevil stunts created some of the most iconic films of all time. The General. Sherlock Jr., Steamboat Bill Jr. These weren't just comedies. They were masterpieces of timing, ingenuity, and physical brilliance. So what's he doing on this list? Because in one shockingly bad decision, Buster Keaton signed away his creative control and his future. In 1928, at the height of his fame, Buster left independent filmmaking and joined MGM. On paper, it looked smart. MGM had money, stars, and national distribution. But what Buster didn't realize was how much control he'd lose. They handed him bland scripts, forced him into formulaic comedies, and took away the one thing that made him unique: his creative freedom. And he agreed to it all. He went from directing his own films to being told how to walk, how to talk, and who to act with. It crushed him. In just a few years, he went from the top of the industry to a studio punchline. His films bombed. He turned to alcohol. His first wife left him. He was fired from MGM, broke and forgotten. At one point, he was so desperate he worked as a gag writer, uncredited, for the very studio that destroyed him. It wasn't until decades later that people rediscovered his early work and hailed him as one of cinema's true pioneers. But by then, Buster had learned the hard way. The dumbest thing a genius can do is underestimate how valuable his genius really is. 11. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi's voice could freeze your blood. When he played Dracula in 1931, audiences were hypnotized. His slow, deliberate cadence, his piercing stare, it was unforgettable. That role should have been the launch pad for a towering career. Instead, it became a coffin he could never climb out of. Lugosi refused to let go of the Dracula persona. He turned down roles that challenged him and clung to typecasting like it was a lifeline. Every time Hollywood offered him something different, he said no. But when a vampire role popped up, he was all in. He even rejected Frankenstein, a role that went to Boris Karloff and made him a household name. Lugosi thought the part didn't have enough lines. It wasn't elegant enough. That single refusal changed the horror genre's hierarchy forever. Karloff became a legend. Lugosi became a shadow. And the roles he did accept? They kept getting worse. By the 1940s, he was doing B-movie horror flicks for pennies. By the 1950s, he was working with Ed Wood, starring in Plan 9 from Outer Space, where he was so frail he couldn't even finish shooting. Wood replaced him with a taller actor who hid his face behind a cape and pretended to be Lugosi. By then, Bela was addicted to morphine, bankrupt, and living in obscurity. He died in 1956 with just $1,900 in his bank account. His last wish: to be buried in his Dracula cape. Bela Lugosi didn't just become a victim of typecasting, he became a prisoner of his own ego, unable to imagine himself as anything but a vampire. 12. Robert Walker. Robert Walker was a rising star in the 1940s, a leading man with soft features, boy-next-door charm, and a contract with MGM. He starred opposite Judy Garland in The Clock, and later gave a career-best performance as the eerie Bruno Anthony in Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. Critics were stunned. Here was an actor who could play vulnerability and menace with equal power. But what audiences didn't see was what was unraveling behind the scenes. Walker was mentally unstable. He suffered from severe anxiety, mood swings, and episodes that alarmed directors and co-stars. Instead of seeking proper treatment, he masked his symptoms with alcohol and erratic behavior. He became so difficult to work with that studios began writing him out of projects. He fought with producers, missed rehearsals, and once broke down sobbing mid-scene. At one point, he was institutionalized for treatment, but walked out before completing therapy. By the early 1950s, he was teetering on the edge. Hitchcock gave him a final shot with Strangers on a Train, and Walker delivered one of the greatest performances in film noir history. But it was too late. Just weeks after the film's release, Robert Walker was dead. Officially, he died from a reaction between alcohol and sedatives given to calm him during an emotional breakdown. He was 32 years old. Walker's tragedy wasn't stupidity in the classic sense. It was the failure to accept help, the refusal to confront the truth. He had the talent, but without stability, he never stood a chance. 13. Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd was the definition of cool under pressure. With his quiet voice, piercing blue eyes, and calm intensity, he became a household name in the 1940s and 50s. He played tough guys in This Gun for Hire and Shane, roles that defined the stoic lone wolf archetype. But behind that cold stare was a man who never outgrew his own insecurities. Ladd had a problem. He was only 5 feet 6 inches, and he never let anyone forget it. He refused to be photographed next to taller actors, demanded trench floors be dug out for him, and stood on apple boxes in almost every scene. It became an obsession. But it wasn't just about height. Alan Ladd couldn't adapt. He had one acting gear: stoic silence. As Hollywood shifted toward more dynamic psychological performances, Ladd stayed frozen in time. He rejected roles that required emotional range, or humor, or vulnerability. He wanted to be the strong, silent type, forever, and his personal life didn't help. Ladd relied heavily on alcohol to cope with anxiety and career decline. By the mid-1950s, offers slowed down. He turned down gritty roles that could have redefined him, fearing they'd tarnish his image. One by one, those roles went to rising stars like Paul Newman and Marlon Brando. In 1964, at just 50 years old, Alan Ladd was found dead from an overdose of alcohol and sleeping pills. His legacy was cemented, but it was a quiet ending for a man who could never grow past the persona he created. 14. John Gilbert. In the silent era, John Gilbert was the romantic lead. Nicknamed the Great Lover, he starred opposite Greta Garbo in one smoldering hit after another. His films were massive successes. His face was plastered across the world, and he commanded one of the highest salaries in Hollywood. Then came sound, and Gilbert crashed hard. For decades, the myth was that his voice was too high-pitched for talkies. That wasn't true. His voice was fine, strong, articulate. The real problem? Gilbert didn't believe in the new medium. He openly mocked the rise of sound films, calling them a fad. When his first few talkies flopped, he blamed the technology, not his acting. Worse, Gilbert feuded bitterly with Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM. When Gilbert threatened to leave, Mayer buried him. He assigned him weak scripts, laughable dialogue, and cheap productions. Gilbert, still thinking of himself as royalty, didn't adapt. He refused to audition, refused to modernize his style, and refused to accept reality. Eventually, the roles stopped coming. Gilbert spiraled into depression and alcoholism. By the time Garbo offered him a chance at a comeback in Queen Christina, he was a shell of his former self, visibly aged, emotionally broken. John Gilbert died in 1936 from a heart attack brought on by years of alcohol abuse. He was just 38. He didn't fail because he lacked talent. He failed because he couldn't imagine a world where he wasn't worshipped and refused to learn how to survive in it. 15th gig. Young Gig Young had one of the most deceptively successful careers in Golden Age Hollywood. He won an Oscar for They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, starred in dozens of popular films, and had a witty, charming screen presence that made him a reliable leading man. But off-screen, he was a walking disaster. Young battled severe alcoholism and mental illness for decades. Studios knew it. Directors whispered about it. Co-stars avoided him. But because he looked the part of a suave, sophisticated man, Hollywood kept giving him chances. And he kept blowing them. He was cast as the Waco Kid in Blazing Saddles, a role written specifically for him. But on the first day of shooting, he showed up drunk, trembling, and incoherent. Mel Brooks fired him immediately. That role went to Gene Wilder, who turned it into comedy gold. Gig Young's personal life was equally disturbing. He married 5 times, one of which lasted just 29 days. His relationships were riddled with abuse, instability, and legal battles. Friends said he could be charming one moment and violent the next. His final act was the most tragic of all. In 1978, just 3 weeks after marrying his 5th wife, he shot her dead in their apartment and then killed himself. The industry was horrified, but not entirely surprised. Gig Young had talent, real talent, but his inability to control his demons made him one of Hollywood's most haunting cautionary tales. In Hollywood, beauty and fame can open every door, but without wisdom, humility, or clarity, those doors can close just as quickly. These stars weren't destroyed by lack of talent. They were destroyed by bad decisions, stubborn pride, or blind ego. Their stories remind us that even in a city of dreams, stupidity never goes out of style.